And the analysis of Shields and Brooks, that is syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. Gentlemen, welcome. It's good to have you here. So the president today called a news conference to urge European leaders, David, to do something about the debt crisis. He said it's solvable, but he's clearly worried about it. Is he right to be talking about it this way?
Absolutely. This is the biggest problem in front of us. It's quite likely that Greece will leave the euro, which will have a very negative effect on Europe and a negative effect on us, not so much because of our exports, but just because of confidence. Some forecasting models predict it'll shrink our growth to 1.7. Now, if Greece leaves, which is more likely, it's possible Spain, bank runs. There's already slow motion bank runs in Spain, Italy, all the peripheral countries. There's a significant possibility, 20, 30, 40% of a complete meltdown across the Eurozone. If that happens, if you talk to many economists, you're looking at a financial crisis worse than 2008. So it's A, completely appropriate the president's talking about this, warning people. B, that he's active in trying to do something. And there's some talk, could he be more involved? Because right now what's happening is sort of a game of chicken in Europe where the Spanish are saying, well, you got to help us out, but we're not really going to give away much sovereignty. The Germans saying, no, you got a structural reform. They're really playing a very dangerous game over there, and it's extremely dangerous for us. So I think the administration policy is quite good right now. The question is whether it should be more aggressive, really having a public summit with Germany, us, some other countries, and really getting beyond the European political situation and getting us all involved.
So is his involvement about the right amount, Mark, or what?
I think the results will determine that, Judy. If it does work and Europe can come together with the president playing a role, then it will have been good. But his fortune, as well as the fate and fortune of this country, is tied so inextricably to Europe and to the rest of the world. I mean, the interdependence is what starts home. It isn't just happening in Greece, or it isn't just happening in Spain. It's felt everywhere, and it's felt here. And we're in an election year, you may have noticed.
Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Golly, I need to look at the calendar. Right. He also talked more today about the U.S. economy and about what needs to be done about it. And he got in a little hot water about the way he talked about the private sector. He said it's doing fine compared to the public sector. But, David, he went on to make the point that Congress needs to pass his jobs plan. He said what we need to do right now is get that money out there to the state and local governments for hiring people and for infrastructure. Is that an approach that makes sense?
I think he's got some solid ground that the layoffs of the public sector workers have not helped. 450,000, whatever it is, of teachers, other state employees. That clearly has not helped. It would be nice if we could have some more money to pay for them. But the idea of stimulus package is to stimulate, and to stimulate small businesses, stimulate private sector activity. And so far that hasn't happened, and really there's no option on the table that in the near term will do that. Since this financial crisis started, the U.S. has borrowed an additional $6 trillion. If we borrow, and all that money's been pumped into the economy, let alone what the Fed has done. If we pump in if it goes from $6 trillion to $6.2 trillion, do we really think the economy is going to get humming? I really do not think so. So I'm not sure. I think he has a very great faith in sort of Keynesian stimulus, but the amount we're doing is awesome right now. Doing a little more, I doubt it's going to create a healthy economy.
How do you see that?
Well, I think he has to do something, and I think the case the president makes about the 500,000 public employees have been cut. I mean, while the private sector is not doing fine, but there have been 4 million jobs created in the private sector since the spring of 2010. And so, obviously the drain and the drawdown from 500,000 public sector jobs being abolished, eliminated, and as well as to the what that does to the quality of national and public life. And I think that's part of a president's concern as well as the GDP.
But is he wasting? Go ahead.
Well, I would just say, look, if you're, as we heard earlier in the program, if you're thinking of whether to expand, invest, and hire, you've got Europe really maybe on the verge of a cataclysm. As we heard earlier in the program, you've got the fiscal cliff, you've got the Chinese slowdown, the Indian slowdown. There's many, many reasons to pull back. And you can stimulate if people are leaning forward, wanting to stimulate, but there's so much else going on in the world. I'm not sure you're going to get much private growth with all this other structural stuff really underlying it.
So does that leave him almost helpless?
Well, I think he's...
I mean, clearly he's working on the European.
Yeah, no, on the European, but I just don't think he's going to get any action out of the Republican House. I mean, I think we've now reached a point where we're into symbolic legislating, where we can pass something in the Democratic Senate that, whether it's equal pay and equal protection law, and make the other side look bad. And it's a legitimate piece of legislation, but it's not going to pass the Republican House. And the Republican House can do its things, and cutting taxes or whatever, on particular groups or interests, but it isn't going to go anywhere in the Senate or have the president sign it. I think we're at loggerheads at this point.
Wisconsin, there was a governor recall vote this week. Governor Scott Walker, the Republican, survived. How much is that bad news for Democrats across the country and for the president, Mark?
I think it's a very much of a cold shower. I mean, power is the perception of power. If I think you have power, David thinks you have power, everybody else thinks you have power. Once your power is exposed, or the lack of it, and certainly in the case of organized labor, there was a sense that this is where public unions began, public employee unions, that it was a blue state. And I think in this sense, it was a real blow to organized labor's political involvement, as well as to its membership because of the new Wisconsin law. Add to that, Judy, I think that you have two approaches to campaigns. There's what I call the organize versus the proselytize. The proselytize thing is we're going to go out and persuade people to support our candidate. The organize is we're just going to get our people, all the ones who are on our side, to turn out. I think they did that very well. I think they got all the votes they were going to get in Wisconsin on the labor side,
Democrats.
But I think that has been the model. It seems to be the model for President Obama's reelection, is organize. And I think they have to think in terms of message is important, money is important. And I think money spoke loudly in Wisconsin.
What's your analysis?
Yeah, I don't think it was the money. I think it was the issue. We went through many decades where states could promise pension benefits, where they could pay for health care benefits, and they could also pay for schools and prisons and water programs and all the other stuff. That is over. We're now in this age of austerity where the pension benefits, the health benefits, all that stuff is just gobbling up the budget. And people have to make a choice. Do we want to pay for this or do we want to pay for that? And if we saw in Wisconsin, we saw in San Jose, we saw in San Diego, when people want to make those choices, their perception, and I think it's an accurate one, is that some of the benefits and some of the pensions got out of control, and they have to be ratcheted back so we can pay for this other stuff. And so I think what's happened, we've entered an era of austerity where the old model of just handing out benefits, making lavish promises that are just unaffordable, that's got to end. And so I really don't think this matters for Obama in November. Whatever it was, 17, 18% of the people who voted for Obama, who said they'll vote for Obama, also voted for Scott Walker.
Right.
I think 38% of union households voted for Scott Walker. And so, I'm not sure it has that message, but it's an end of a certain style of welfare model.
What about that?
Well, I think there's two things. I think what we're watching is a public debate that has never really started. I mean, if you are for public libraries, public spaces, public transportation, public education, public recreation, that's what government does do. And but if you can afford to buy private security and private education and private club memberships and private trainers, and it's a public versus private debate, and I think it's one overdue in this country. And I think the Democrats have really let down the side of the value of the public sector in our lives.
Yeah.
How have they?
Yeah.
What do you mean they've let it down?
I don't think this administration or the president or leading Democrats make the case that government does make your life better, whether it makes the medicine your children take safe or the food that you eat safe. I mean, all the things that are done every single day. But I think this is part of the debate that's coming, and at least it should come, Judy. But I'd add to that. I think it's important because the model. When you win an election, politics is entirely derivative and imitative. And what the Republicans found out, much I disagree with David, is if you can get enough people to write checks for millions of dollars, you can tie down your opponent. You can spend money to force your opponent to defend what is his territory and what is presumed, whether it's Pennsylvania, whether it's New Jersey, if you've got enough money. And I think that'll be the model that the lesson the Republicans will take out of Wisconsin is we can do this with seven-figure contributions.
So you're saying that was determinative. That was partly determinative.
I think when you succeed, you look at the formula and you draw from that. And I think what they will draw from it is major contributions will give us options and give us an advantage that we obviously didn't have. John McCain didn't have when he was outspent effectively 2-1 by Obama in 2008.
First, I would say that it's not public versus private; it's public versus public. What schools in Milwaukee and all around the state of Wisconsin have discovered since these reforms were made is they could save money on health insurance. They could save money on all this stuff they were forced to pay for before, and they can put that money into education, into the school. So it's two different public costs, and it's how we're going to rebalance public budgets. I think that's the core debate.
I agree with that.
And as for the money, I think the money is not going to affect. First of all, I don't think it had a huge effect in this race. It was very similar. They just had an election 2 years ago.
Let it be noted, Mark just deeply sighed.
Deeply sighed. It's a sign of deep disrespect.
Respect, but sympathy.
Sympathy. Oh, good. He's sympathizing for my ignorance. But these two guys just ran against each other, and the results were very similar. And the final thing I'll say is about the presidential election. They're going to be running in 12 states. Both campaigns are going to have plenty of money. Money will not be an issue in the presidential race. I do think money will be an issue in congressional races.
So the fact that Romney outraised Obama $77 million to $60 million in May, does that make a difference? Is that a one-time thing?
No, it's significant. No, I mean, because the Republican race is over now. There's no reason, if you're a Republican giver, to sit on the sidelines, whether you were supporting Rick Santorum or you didn't want to make a pick. It's come back to where we knew Republicans were going to be. They want to beat Barack Obama. And they're going to open up their wallets and open up their security safety boxes. They're going to the family jewels are going to be cast in. I'm telling you,
we consider the two of you our family jewels, David Brooks, Mark Shields. Thank you. And it's good to know that Mark and David keep up this talk on the double header. That's on our website coming up right after this program.